Think about the last time you used a search engine that wasn't Google. Maybe you switched to DuckDuckGo because someone told you Google was tracking everything. Maybe you tried Ecosia because you heard it plants trees. Maybe you're using Yahoo because it came pre-installed and you never changed it. Maybe you moved to Startpage because it promised you Google results without Google watching you. Whatever it was, you made a choice. You thought you were diversifying. You thought you were stepping away from Google's grip. What if I told you that you never left? What if the search engine you switched to, the one sitting in your browser right now, the one you thought was your escape, is actually still Google? Just wearing a different mask, a different logo, a different color scheme. But underneath all of that, every single query you type is still flowing directly to the same server, the same algorithm, the same company that you were trying to avoid. You just didn't know it because nobody told you. Here's the truth that the search engine industry has never made a big effort to explain, and honestly, they have every reason to keep it quiet. Out of the dozens of search engines that exist in the world right now, only 3 have actually built their own index of the internet. Only 3 companies have sent their own crawlers out across the web, visiting billions of pages, downloading content, analyzing links, and building their own independent map of what the internet looks like. Only 3. And every other search engine you've ever heard of is essentially renting results from one of those 3, or in some cases, from 2 of them combined. Those 3 are Google, Bing, and Yandex. That's it. That's the entire foundation of the world's search infrastructure. Every other search experience you've ever had is built on top of one of those 3 engines. DuckDuckGo, Bing, Yahoo, Bing, Ecosia, Bing, AOL Search, Bing, Startpage, Google. Quant, for a long time, relied partially on Bing. Ask.com, Google. Swiss Cows, Bing. OneSearch, Bing. The list goes on, and the answer is almost always the same. Now, before we go any further, I want to make something clear because this video isn't about calling any of these companies liars or frauds. Many of them are doing genuinely valuable things. DuckDuckGo is serious about not storing your personal search data. Ecosia is actually planting trees. Startpage genuinely acts as a privacy proxy between you and Google. These are real features. But there's a fundamental misunderstanding that most users have about what a search engine actually is, and that misunderstanding changes everything about how you should think about your online privacy. So let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about what it actually takes to build a real search engine, one with its own index. Because when you understand the scale of what that requires, everything else starts to make sense. The internet is enormous. That sounds like an obvious statement, but the actual scale of it is hard to process. As of the mid-2020s, there are somewhere between 5 and 600 million active websites on the internet. Not pages, websites. And within those websites, there are hundreds of billions of individual pages, documents, videos, images, and pieces of content. Every single day, new pages are created, old pages are updated, links change, content disappears. The internet is not a static library. It is a living, constantly mutating ecosystem that changes faster than any human could possibly track. A real search engine has to keep up with all of that. It sends out programs called web crawlers, sometimes called spiders or bots, that travel across the internet by following links, one page to the next, downloading content, processing it, and sending it back to be stored and indexed. Google's crawler, which is called Googlebot, visits hundreds of billions of pages. The infrastructure required to store, process, and serve that information is staggering. Google has data centers on every continent, thousands of servers, entire facilities dedicated to nothing but storing the world's web content and making it searchable in a fraction of a second. Analysts estimate that Google has spent somewhere in the range of $10 to $15 billion building and maintaining this infrastructure over the years. Some estimates go higher. Microsoft spent similarly enormous sums building Bing. They started from scratch in the mid-2000s when they decided that relying on other search providers was a strategic weakness, and they invested billions of dollars and years of engineering work to create an index that could compete with Google. Today, Bing processes billions of searches per month and powers a significant portion of the English language web search that happens outside of Google, including most of the searches you think you're doing on other search engines. Yandex built its index primarily focused on the Russian language internet and Eastern European markets. Though its coverage has expanded significantly over the years, it faced enormous geopolitical challenges after 2022, and its global relevance outside of Russia has diminished for reasons that go well beyond technology. But as of the time this video was made, Yandex still maintains its own independent web index, which puts it in the same rare category as Google and Bing. Now here's where it gets interesting, and a little uncomfortable if you're someone who's made decisions about your privacy based on your choice of search engine. DuckDuckGo is probably the most famous privacy-focused search engine in the world. It has hundreds of millions of users. Its entire brand identity is built on the idea that it doesn't track you, doesn't store your searches, doesn't build a profile of who you are. And those claims are broadly true. DuckDuckGo's own behavior is genuinely privacy respecting. But DuckDuckGo does not have its own web index. Its primary source for search results is Bing. Your search query travels through DuckDuckGo's servers. DuckDuckGo strips out identifying information, and then it sends a request to Bing for results. Bing processes that query. Bing's algorithm determines what you see. And while DuckDuckGo is doing real work to protect your identity in that transaction, the fact remains that Microsoft's infrastructure is the engine doing the actual searching. DuckDuckGo does supplement its Bing results with other sources. It has its own crawler for certain things. It pulls in information from Wikipedia and various specialized databases, and it has its own mechanisms for some types of answers. But the core web search results, the list of websites you see when you search for something, that is fundamentally a Bing product with a privacy layer on top of it. Yahoo Search has a similar story. Yahoo was once the dominant search engine of the internet's early days. Before Google even existed, Yahoo was the place people went to find things online. But over time, Yahoo fell behind, failed to keep up with Google's advances, and eventually made a fateful decision. In 2009, Yahoo signed a 10-year agreement with Microsoft to use Bing to power its search results. Yahoo's web crawling capabilities were effectively wound down. Today, when you search on Yahoo, you are searching Bing. The logo is different. The color is purple instead of blue. But the results come from exactly the same place. Ecosia is a particularly interesting case because it has built an enormous following on the basis of its environmental mission. The company donates a significant portion of its advertising revenue to tree planting organizations, and by some counts, it has funded the planting of hundreds of millions of trees. That mission is real. That impact is real. But Ecosia's search results come from Bing. When you search on Ecosia, you are getting Bing results. And a portion of the advertising revenue that Microsoft would have earned from that search instead goes to environmental projects. It's a genuinely creative model. But if you switch to Ecosia because you wanted to escape Microsoft or Google's influence on your search results, the switch didn't accomplish that. Startpage occupies a fascinating niche in this landscape. Its selling point is that it gives you Google's search results, the full quality, the full relevance. But it acts as a middleman so that Google cannot see who you are. You search on Startpage. Startpage queries Google on your behalf using its own server IP addresses. Google returns the results, and Startpage passes them to you. Google sees a request from Startpage's servers, not from your device. So in theory, your identity is protected even while you get Google quality results. It's a clever solution to a real problem, and for many people, it genuinely works well. But there are a few things worth thinking about. First, you are still trusting Startpage completely. Everything you search goes through their servers. If Startpage's privacy policy ever changes, if the company is acquired by someone with different values, if a government compels them to hand over data, the protection disappears. And in 2019, Startpage was partially acquired by System1, a US-based advertising technology company. Startpage maintained that this did not compromise its privacy practices. Privacy researchers examined the situation and came to mixed conclusions. Some were satisfied, others remained skeptical. The point is not that Startpage is bad. The point is that privacy through a middleman is only as strong as that middleman, and middlemen have histories that can change. Second, you're still dependent on Google's algorithm. The results you see on Startpage are Google's results, shaped by Google's sense of what's relevant, authoritative, and worth ranking. Google's algorithm reflects its own interests and priorities, even beyond pure relevance. If Google has reasons to rank certain things higher and certain things lower, commercial, political, or otherwise, those choices come through on Startpage just as they do on Google itself. Now let's talk about why this matters beyond the question of which company owns your search results. Because there's a deeper issue here that connects to how we think about information, knowledge, and power on the internet. When one company, or effectively two, if you count Microsoft alongside Google, controls the index through which most of the world accesses information, that company has extraordinary power over what people see, what they believe, and what they know. The decisions that Google's engineers make about how to rank pages don't just affect which websites get traffic. They affect what millions of people around the world learn about medical treatments, about historical events, about political candidates, about scientific research. They affect which small businesses survive and which ones disappear. They affect whose voices are amplified and whose are buried. Google has faced antitrust scrutiny in multiple countries for precisely this reason. In 2023, the United States Department of Justice filed one of the most significant antitrust cases against a tech company since the Microsoft case of the 1990s, specifically targeting Google's dominance in the search market. The European Union has levied billions of euros in fines against Google over various competition concerns, including its search practices. The core argument in all of these cases is essentially the same. When one company has a near monopoly on how people find information, that's not just a business issue. It's a structural problem for the health of the internet and the broader information ecosystem. But the monopoly is even deeper than people realize, because it's not just that Google is the most popular search engine. It's that Google's infrastructure underpins so many of the alternatives that people think are different. The diversity of search engines that appears to exist is largely an illusion. A front-end diversity sitting on top of a back-end that is dominated by two companies. So what does actually exist that's genuinely independent? Are there any real alternatives? Engines with their own indexes that aren't just Google or Bing in disguise? There are a few. They're worth knowing about. Brave Search is probably the most significant new entrant in this space. Brave, the privacy-focused browser company, launched its own search engine with a genuinely independent web index. It's not complete. For certain queries, Brave Search still supplements its results with anonymized Bing or Google results when its own index doesn't have a strong answer. But the company is transparent about this and is actively working to reduce its dependence on third-party indexes. Brave Search is at a genuinely different stage than the alternatives that simply rebrand Bing results. It is actually trying to build the infrastructure layer, not just the privacy layer. Mojik is a smaller British search engine that has been quietly building its own web index for years. It is genuinely independent. It does not use Google or Bing results at all. The trade-off is that its index is smaller, its results are sometimes less comprehensive, and its ranking isn't as sophisticated as a company that has spent $10 billion on the problem. But it exists. It works. And for users who are serious about true independence from the Google-Microsoft duopoly, it represents something real rather than something cosmetic. Common Crawl is a nonprofit organization that runs its own web crawler and makes the resulting data publicly available. It's not really a consumer search engine. You can't go to Common Crawl and type a query and get results, but several search engines and research projects use Common Crawl data as a foundation for their own indexes. In a meaningful sense, Common Crawl represents an attempt to create a public interest alternative to the proprietary indexes that Google and Microsoft guard jealously. The reason more independent search engines don't exist comes back to that infrastructure problem we talked about earlier. Building a web crawler that can keep up with the modern internet requires a level of investment that is essentially impossible for a small company to sustain. You need data centers. You need bandwidth, enormous amounts of bandwidth, because you're downloading a meaningful portion of the entire internet on an ongoing basis. You need engineers who specialize in distributed systems, search algorithms, and information retrieval at a scale that very few engineers in the world have experience with. You need the financial runway to sustain all of this for years before you have anything good enough that users would choose it over Google. This is why the search engine market ended up the way it did. Google had the right idea at the right time, attracted enormous venture capital investment, and built out its own infrastructure during a period when the internet was still small enough to be crawled on a startup budget. By the time competitors realized how dominant Google was becoming, the cost of catching up had grown to a level that only Microsoft, a company with billions of dollars in existing revenue, could sustain. Everyone else was priced out. And the result is the landscape we live in today, where two companies control the foundation of how the world finds information online. Now let's bring this back to you and what it actually means for the decisions you make every day. Because knowing all of this changes something important about how you should think about search engine privacy. If you switched from Google to DuckDuckGo for privacy reasons, you made a meaningful improvement. DuckDuckGo genuinely does not store your personal search data the way Google does. That's real and it matters. But you should understand what you actually got. You got DuckDuckGo's privacy practices applied on top of Bing's search technology. You're not using a fundamentally different piece of infrastructure. You are using the same underlying index with a privacy wrapper. Microsoft's servers are still processing your queries. Microsoft is still seeing search traffic that originates from DuckDuckGo's users, even if individual queries aren't tied to your identity. If you switch to Ecosia because you care about the environment, that's a genuinely good choice in terms of where advertising revenue goes. But your search results are still coming from Bing. The trees are real. The search engine independence is not. If you're using Start Page because you want Google's quality without Google's tracking, you're doing something sophisticated and reasonably well-informed. But you're dependent on Start Page remaining a trustworthy intermediary, and you're still operating within Google's algorithmic worldview of what information matters and what doesn't. The question of what to actually do with this information is genuinely difficult, because the honest answer is that there is no perfect solution right now. The infrastructure duopoly is real, the cost of building genuine alternatives is enormous, and most of us are going to be dependent on Google or Bing results in some form for the foreseeable future. What changes is how honestly we understand that dependence. If privacy is your primary concern, DuckDuckGo is still meaningfully better than using Google directly. Just understand its limitations. If you want to support genuine independence from the duopoly, Brave Search is worth using and worth knowing about, even if it's still growing. If you care about algorithmic independence, about getting results that aren't shaped by Google's or Microsoft's priorities, that's harder. Mojik exists, but it's still a limited product. The honest answer is that algorithmic independence is not really available to ordinary users at this moment in history. What you can do is use multiple search engines for different purposes. Use DuckDuckGo or Brave. Search for most of your day-to-day queries. Use Google directly when you need the most comprehensive results, and you've accepted the privacy trade-off for that specific search. Use Mojik or other genuinely independent engines occasionally, both because they sometimes surface different results and because using them supports the existence of independent alternatives. Don't let one company's algorithm be the exclusive lens through which you see the web. There's one more thing I want to say before we close, because I think it's the most important part of all of this. The fact that only 3 real search indexes exist is not inevitable. It is the result of specific decisions, specific investments, and specific competitive dynamics that unfolded over a specific period of time. It could have been different. It could still change. The search infrastructure of the internet is not a law of nature. It's a business arrangement. In business, arrangements can shift when users make different choices, when regulators make different demands, when investors fund different projects, when engineers decide to work on different problems. Brave is proving right now that a small team with the right focus can start building a credible independent index. It's hard, it's expensive, it's slow, but it's happening. And the more people are aware that the problem exists, the more people understand that the diversity of search engines they see is mostly a front-end illusion sitting on top of a back-end duopoly, the more they can make choices that support the emergence of real alternatives. You didn't know this when you opened this video. Now you do. And knowledge like this, shared widely enough, is actually how things change, not overnight, not easily, but eventually and genuinely. Share this with someone who thinks they escaped Google by switching search engines. Ask them what search engine they use, and then tell them what you just learned, not to make them feel bad, but because they deserve to know the same thing you now know. Because an informed internet user is a harder person to quietly exploit, and quietly exploiting people's assumption of choice is exactly how the current situation has been maintained for so long. The internet is yours as much as it is anyone else's. Act like it.